I used to have a big problem sticking with my weekly review. And the reason why, at least that I found, is it was just so long. Like I found it would be hard to fit the time, or I wasn't prioritizing it because I had this mental block. Oh man, I just don't want to deal with it. So I have found that since streamlining my weekly review and then using some other productivity strategies, it's been way more consistent with it, which has really boosted my productivity. And if you think about it, the official way to do a weekly review, and I know it's official because the copy of the GTD book that I have a post-it note that I probably put there in 2006 or something like that. And it was the page for weekly reviews. And every week I would get the book off my shelf, I would open it to the post-it note, and I would go through the chapter. And so basically the way you're supposed to do it is you gather up your notes, you check all your inboxes, you get to inbox 0, you enter your head of uncaptured ideas, then you review all your next actions, you review all your projects, you review your previous calendar, you review your future calendar, you review your waiting for lists and follow-ups and stuff like that. That is all one thing. And then review your someday maybe. Is there anything that should be a real project? And then there's what they call be creative and courageous, like any wild and big ideas you can come up with. And it's a lot. And all those are good things to do. It's a lot. And there's 2 problems with that. Number 1, it can take a long time if you do it all. And number 2, it can be just mentally taxing. It becomes easy to really skip once, and then you can skip it twice. And then once you skip it twice, the wheels start to come off your productivity system because you don't trust your trusted system anymore. So the recommendation we have is just streamline it, like really take an axe to that. Just because it's in that chapter of GTD doesn't mean that you have to actually follow it. So the one recommendation I would have is they recommend getting to inbox 0 during the weekly review. I think that is not really realistic for most people to do. I would say, in fact, not even trying. Like you want to have good email practices, and we've talked a lot about email on the podcast, so we won't get into that. You want to stay on top of your email as much as possible, but when it comes to your weekly review, that is not the time to try and be going through your email to file it all away and stuff like that. So what I would recommend is for whatever you have there in your inbox in, say, the last week, just skim it for anything that sticks out. You'll see emails that will trigger things that you need to do, and then fine, pick it off from there. But don't sit there trying to get to inbox 0 during the weekly review. That's what I would recommend. Getting most things is better than doing nothing. So that would be one thing. And number 2, I would recommend skipping the whole 50,000 feet, be creative and courageous, coming up with your big ideas and stuff like that part. And again, not that is not important. It is a really good thing to do. But I think that should be done as part of like quarterly planning or monthly planning. Really, to me, that doesn't really have a place in weekly review. A weekly review to me should be a lot more like tactical and things you can do in the next week. So yeah, I would recommend taking really a chainsaw to your weekly review practice and really trying to zero in on the things that will help you right now. What do you think, Tan? What does your weekly review look like?
So mine is about maybe 20 to 30 minutes or so. So I do it every Sunday. And I've created my own checklist that I have in Evernote that I just go through really quickly. And I would agree with a couple things that you said. One is inbox 0. That's something I don't even do when I go through my weekly review. I have so many inboxes that, yes, I kind of want to look at stuff, but I don't know, make it like a requirement to say, okay, I have to be in inbox 0 at everything, because I might have to check my WhatsApp, my drafts, my Apple Notes, my email inboxes, and I have like multiple emails. And that alone can take like at least an hour just to get to inbox 0. And by that time, you're already done, right? Like you don't have the energy for other stuff. What I think is most important is just being current and up to date. One of the biggest takeaways that I've had from the weekly review part in GTD is just making sure that every project has a next action. Meaning, if you look at something, you should know right away what's the first step that you should take action on. And if you don't have that, then oftentimes projects get stuck and then they get postponed and delayed and we procrastinate and stuff like that. And this is where the weekly review is really helpful, is to say, okay, does everything have a next action? But there's also this waterfall effect where if we zoom out and say, hey, if you have 10 or 15 committed projects, a weekly review can take a long time because you might be overcommitted to like too many different things, versus I have maybe 2 or 3 projects that I'm working on at any given time. So guess what? My weekly review by default is a little faster because there's only 2 things or 3 things that I have to make sure all have a next action, right? And so one of the things we always teach here is we want to make sure we always hit the critical few And if you're having like 10, 15 projects, you're probably overcommitted. So as a waterfall effect, what can you do to limit the amount of things you're committed to and working on? And that by itself will make it a lot easier to go through your weekly review, because then you just have to make sure that there's one next action for every single project that you're working on. And that goes by usually relatively quickly. Plus, if you have some good practices in terms of making sure that everything you write down is always actionable and stuff like that, that makes your weekly review a lot easier as well. If there's one major takeaway, I would just say create your own checklist, because then you can go through it very quickly. And it's one of those things where the more you do the weekly review, the faster you get at it as well. Like the first time is any particular skill you're trying to learn, you're going to be slow. It's kind of like if you're cooking a dish for the first time, you have to read every single step, right, of the recipe and figure out, is this too much salt? Is this too much pepper? And over time, anyone who has cooked for a long time will just, if they say a pinch of salt, you just grab it. You don't like really measure it. You just throw it in there and estimate, right? And that's how we do things with weekly reviews here as well. That's like how I would approach it. But again, the checklist, I can't hammer that home enough.